Hi everyone, it's Mr. Sinti, and this video is going to be a discussion on the colon. That's right, it's the last segment of the digestive system, and the colon is sometimes called the large intestine because it has a much greater diameter than that of the small intestine. Although the small intestine connects to it right over here in this little pouch area called the cecum. And so let's get into this conversation about the colon. It's a really important part of the digestive system. It's sort of the finale, if you will. And right out of the gate, I'm going to just tell you the most important function of the large intestine or the colon. So those are synonymous. Here's the colon right here. It's about 1.5 meters long. But the major function is to retain water. Okay, so it's going to reclaim the water that's been passing through your small intestine, which is aiding in the movement, and it's also aiding in the hydrolysis of the food. And so the very last part of the small intestine, your ileum, is connecting to this pouch area again called the cecum. And so this larger intestine right here, sometimes called the colon, is connected right there at this little junction. Okay, and so there's a sphincter right there, which sort of is the door, a ring of muscles that will control the movement into the cecum right there. And so one of the things that people like to talk about when discussing the cecum, if people are talking about the intestine, they like to talk about this worm-like structure that comes off sort of like a little tail, like a little ponytail from the large intestine. This is over in the lower abdominal cavity on your right side, anatomical right. And so this worm-like appendage coming off is called your appendix. That's right. And it's sort of like the size of like your pinky a little bit. And the thing about the thing about the appendix is that it doesn't have an apparent major function. And so sometimes what we call an organ that doesn't have any particular function, we call it vestigial. And so, there's a long history of conversation when it comes to the appendix about people speculate that early primates, our evolutionary ancestors, may have been more eating a diet more large in vegetation, and therefore the appendix in primary consumers or herbivores have larger, generally, appendix, which house bacteria that break down cellulose. And so people speculate that it has become reduced in humans and it doesn't have an apparent function. Although, studies still continue to investigate possible positive outcomes from having it. So there are bacteria in there, and one of the problems is that sometimes it can become infected, and so you can have appendicitis, and so sometimes that needs to be removed, and so that can become serious if it ruptures. And so the true name of the appendix is veriform, and so that kind of means worm-like appendix. And so here's that pouch that I was referring to as the cecum right there, that little pocket area. And again, the colon houses a tremendous amount of bacteria. And so the shape of it is sort of an upside down U. And it's about 1.5 meters long. And I know some of us have a difficult time relating to the metric system. So it's around 4 feet in length. It will vary in individuals. Okay, so you have this part of the intestine which ascends right here, and then there's these turns right here, making a transverse colon come across right there. And then you have this descending colon area. And then this sort of S-shaped area is referred to as the sigmoid colon. And then here is the rectum where feces are stored temporarily. And then the final sphincter is the anal canal, or opening to the outside where the feces is eliminated. And so here's an actual picture of the appendix. It is kind of worm-like, and here's the cecum that I was referring to. And here's some adipose tissue. And so the major function, as I was saying about the colon, was to recover water. And so the cells of the colon do a great job at absorbing water, absorbing water. And so, as it turns out, there's a lot of water to be absorbed. And so, about 7 liters on average is secreted by the lumen of the digestive tract. And so, these are goblet cells that are producing lots of mucus that are helping the digestion process. But about 90% of that is reabsorbed. Okay, and so, as it turns out, the rest of it is lost in the form of water, and the remains of our undigested food are feces. And so those are sort of semi-solid, and they're moved along through the colon through wave-like rhythmic contractions known as peristalsis. And I hope you're familiar with the fact that there's a circular and longitudinal muscle layer in the alimentary canal, which then squeezes the feces through. And so here you have a picture of the colon right here. Here's the ascending transverse, descending sigmoid, rectum. Here's an actual picture of the colon right there. So that's pretty cool. And so the movement of the undigested food through the colon is kind of sluggish, and so it takes a while. And so it's sped up by the presence of fiber, so that's undigested polysaccharide, cellulose. But nevertheless, it requires many hours for the food, or I should say at this point, the feces, to travel the length of the organ. Okay, and so here's a really cool light microscope view at the tissues of the colon. And here's the lumen right in here where the feces are stored. What's interesting is, if I can animate this, I'd say that, again, one of the major functions is to reabsorb water. And there's these interesting glandular-like features. Notice one thing, to contrast the colon with the small intestine, is the small intestine has these finger-like projections going into the lumen called intestinal villi, whereas the colon does not possess intestinal villi whatsoever. But instead, it has a tremendous amount of goblet cells. You see all these circular, hollow-looking cells? All of these goblet cells secrete a tremendous amount of mucus. And so these goblet cells are secreting mucus, and this mucus is really protective, and it also helps to coat the intestinal mucosa to allow the feces to move through. And so one of the difficulties that we have is that sometimes if there's an infection in the body and there's some pathogenic bad bacteria in the colon, sometimes our body is able to react to that by increasing the muscular contraction, as you can see down below here in the muscle layer, the smooth muscle layer. And so if the colon is working extra hard, squeezing through peristalsis, it's going to eliminate a lot of the harmful bacteria that are in our colon. But as a consequence, since it moves very quickly, it doesn't give the colon the proper opportunity to reabsorb most of the water, and so the feces tends to be very fluid-like, and we call that diarrhea. And so it can result in an insufficient water absorption. And so one of the problems is that can actually cause dehydration as well. And so constipation is sort of the opposite of that, where we don't have a difficult time moving the feces out, and it's extremely dry and it's kind of stagnating in the colon. It's kind of an unpleasant conversation, sorry about that. And so thus the mucus is helping to move it along, and this is when there's too much water being absorbed in constipation. Perhaps a little bit of fiber would be helpful there. And then there's also some medication that can be given to increase the contraction to move the feces out. And so there's some laxatives that can be over-the-counter and also prescription to improve constipation. And so, again, one of the things about the colon is that it's really, really rich in a flora of harmless bacteria. I know bacteria have such a bad reputation that I don't even think I'll be able to talk you out of it. Because you're like, I'm sorry, I don't like bacteria. And you're like, especially the ones in my colon. But maybe it's the most famous bacteria of all is in your colon. It's referred to as Escherichia, which is the genus name, coli species, so or just commonly known as E. coli. And it's a favorite organism for research. There's so many studies done on it. All of its DNA has been sequenced, and we use it all the time in the lab. it has a funny history. Like why would we use a colon bacteria as a model organism? And I'm not positive, but I think it was just a researcher at Stanford University many years ago. It was just easily accessible. And so there you have it. And so as a byproduct of the fact that there's a lot of bacteria there breaking down undigested food, they tend to metabolize that and grow and grow and grow and produce various gases ranging from carbon dioxide to methane to hydrogen sulfide. And so a lot of times, we don't appreciate those gases coming out of our anus, because those gases in and of themselves are not too terrifically harmful, but when the gases pass through undigested feces, it tends to have an odor associated with it, and so that's not so good. And so here's a close-up scanning electron micrograph of that E. coli that I was talking about. And so what good are they? Well, they produce a variety of vitamins, which are really cool. And so these vitamins help to supplement our diet. And so even if we're deficient, these bacteria are helping us out. So things like biotin, folic acid, which is really important, especially during pregnancy. Vitamin K is produced by these bacteria in our colon, and several B vitamins as well. So positive contributions from the bacteria in our colon. And so this is the main component of our feces. Our main ingredient in feces is this sort of undigested cellulose, this plant wall material. Okay, it's very difficult to digest. Those of you who are into biochemistry will know that the galactosidase linkages between the sugars in the cellulose rotate between alpha and beta orientation, and it's just very difficult to digest. There's only a handful of organisms that are capable of doing that. And so these cellulose fibers, when we eat them, they have no caloric value. So in other words, they're not broken down and absorbed, but they do help because they help to move along the food in the digestive tract. And so that's useful to eat a diet that's really, really high in cellulose. It's things like fruits and vegetables, so plant material. So the feces can also contain a little bit of extra salt that could be excreted as well. And so the terminal portion of the colon, I want to cut to the chase here, is the rectum. This is where the feces are stored until they're eliminated. And again, there's two sphincters that can control the opening of the anus. And one of them is voluntary, one of them is involuntary. And so when contractions take place, we're able to remove the fecal material from the anus. And so that's a good thing. And so finally, what I wanted to talk to you about was, when all of us get up in age, and so the physicians generally recommend that everyone has this procedure called a colonoscopy. So it's, in other words, it's a look at the inside of the colon. And so when you're approximately 50 years old, you should go in at least for your first colonoscopy, unless you've had some symptoms of trouble in the colon. But then you should have it regularly done after that. And so sometimes the colonoscopy has a bad reputation because, again, one of the problems with it is that, I'm not saying that it's pleasant, but the day before the colonoscopy, you're asked to drink a beverage that helps to eliminate a lot of the material that's fecal material that's in the colon, so that the physician can have a clean view. And again, that may be a part of the problem. But today, it's fairly painless. Like the patient will come in and they're given a sedative, and so they're kind of relaxed about it. And there's the camera itself is attached here. The lens is here, and it's on this sort of 4 to 5 feet long tube that's really soft and flexible. And the physician, as you can see here, can control it. And so you need to be able to control it in order to move through all the curves of the colon, to get through the sigmoid and go up in the transverse and come down. And so what's interesting is you can monitor and actually look inside a person's colon. And you're likely thinking, why would you look inside a person's colon? Well, sometimes you can see some weird looking lesions, and then maybe there's even some growth called polyps that may be appearing there. And so it's important for the physician to take a look at that. And so if a polyp is suspected to be trouble, you can tease through the scope a little metal, it's not really little, it's really a long metal rod, and it has like this little pin on it. And so it can prick the polyp and then squeeze it and remove it. And so tissue biopsy can be sampled from the inside of the colon. This is really important because if physicians were able to treat everyone with a colonoscopy, I'm sure they'll be able to tell you that major amounts of colon cancer can be prevented by looking ahead of time. Sometimes a colonoscopy will even discover a cancer and the patient doesn't even have any symptoms. So it's really important. You're like, well, just grabbing the tissue doesn't tell you if you have cancer. You have to remove the tissue and then again take a look at it under the microscope and take a look at the tissue to sort of look for these things. And so colonoscopy, very important. Let me recommend it. And so it's a good thing. So I hope you enjoyed this look at the colon, and that concludes the end of this video. Thanks for watching.